I would like first of all to thank you very much for accepting our invitation to give us two talks or conversations which conclude this fourth edition of our course on Indian knowledge systems.
I must thank you, sir.
At IIT Gandhinagar. And since this is now being watched not only by our students here who have already read about you, but also by external audience on YouTube live streaming, I would like to remind everybody that you have been one of the pioneers of Indian knowledge systems in India, and you have been a great proponent and exponent of these intellectual traditions, and you have tried to convince generations of students, quite a few generations, since, as you told me the other day, you have been teaching for something like 60 years, that there was something valuable worth learning and understanding in those knowledge traditions. You have been a long-time professor at Jawaharlal Nehru University in Delhi. Initially, you were teaching English language and literature, and you had a...
Continued to teach English literature till the end.
You continued till the end, and in addition, you were given a special title, which was concurrent professor for Sanskrit studies, which I believe this title was made specially for you. And you actually founded eventually at JNU a special school of Sanskrit studies, which it was called Special Center of Sanskrit Studies. Now it has become a school. And apart from this, you have written a lot. You have lectured very widely in India and abroad. I would like to show a couple of your books. You have spoken and written quite a lot on. Let me.
This is Panini.
Yes.
Panini.
Panini and the traditions that he initiated and the kind of methods that he followed. So this was Dimensions of Panini Grammar. You have spoken very much, and this is an extremely important book, one of those that struck me the most personally as a student. I gained the most perhaps from this one, Text and Interpretation, the Indian Tradition. And we will be discussing some of this. As I said, you championed Indian knowledge systems and organized many conferences and events. And one of these at the Indian Institute of Advanced Studies, Shimla, almost 20 years ago, resulted in this proceeding this series of papers, co-edited by yourself and by the late Avinash Kumar Singh. Among other things, and this is one area where I was privileged to collaborate with you, there was also a course, elective course for the CBSE, which began in, I think, 2012, if I remember well. And these two volumes were for classes 11 and 12, a fairly comprehensive view of Indian knowledge traditions in all fields, from the arts to the sciences to literature to philosophy and much more. So your career has been very full, and in fact, this will be my very first question to you, since we have agreed that we're going to have these two sessions more as a conversation.
Sir, you can. May I say something?
Certainly, Kapilji, with pleasure.
Or is it that I only answer and you ask? Or can I say something?
Please.
I thought, since, sir, when we talked the other day, you said this is the framework, but it's not rigid. I mean, one can walk out of it, the framework also.
Certainly.
Now, since morning, I have been looking at some of the things. The purpose of our interaction today is to give not just an idea, but the taste of India's knowledge systems, taste of India's intellectual traditions. So maybe if you give me about 10 minutes, if you can,
Certainly.
I will talk about the covers of these two books that you have shown. The Indian knowledge systems, and the text and interpretation. In fact, every cover of the book, text and interpretation. Every cover is is a key to Bharatiya Jnana Parampara, and it gives you the idea of continuity, as well as what you mentioned in one of your questions, the disjunction, the loss and the recovery. Now, for example, if everybody can see, जवाहरलाल जी आपको आ गया है लिंक? हाँ जी, नहीं अभी आ गया है सर. Everybody can look at this title. Can you see the title?
Yes, very well. Very well.
Now look at this. Look at this.
Kapilji, please raise it a little bit. Just a little, if you can. Ah, perfect.
So, you see, this is the statuette of Vag Devi, the goddess of Vak, speech. Goddess of speech. Because in India, language is speech, not writing, as it is in the Western tradition till the 20th century phonocentric revolution by Saussure. See, in India, language is speech, vak. We have three words: bhasha, vak, vachana. Vani, 4 words. A goddess of speech. Why goddess of speech? Because language, that is speech, language is the instrument of knowledge. As Bhartrihari says, Jnanam sarvena, all knowledge. Jnanam sarvena, shabdam bhasate. All knowledge exists in words. And because of the sanctity that India has always attached to knowledge, the last question that Danino ji is going to ask is, every civilization has knowledge. What about Indian knowledge? Why Indian knowledge? Because India is the most ancient knowledge-centered civilization, with the first book in the world, first poetry in the world, first prose in the world, first book of astronomy in the world, first book of phonetics in the world, and you can go on and on. The 6 Vedangas, each has the Shastras, and these exist even today. Even for example, in phonetics, just Banaras Hindu University Library has 120 manuscripts of Shiksha, phonetics. Just that. This is almost after an enormous loss. So, Vak is speech is elevated to the status of a goddess. And in the Rig Veda, you have a hymn to Vak, goddess. It is Mandal 10 and hymn 125, Vak. So, goddess of knowledge, goddess of speech. This statuette was installed by Bhojaraj Parmar, the great king of Dhar. Dhar is a city in Madhya Pradesh near Bhopal. In fact, Bhopal is Bhupal, the protector of earth. And that was a title given to Bhojaraj, because Bhojaraj blocked the stream in Bhopal, and the lake you have in Bhopal was created by Bhojaraj Parmar. He was a great warrior, he was a great scientist, and he was a great scholar. And he wrote Sanskrit, Vyakaran Kantha, a book on grammar. He wrote a book on Indian poetics, and so on. So Bhojaraj had created a Vidya Shala, an educational place in Bhopal. in Dhar, and this was the goddess there. Of course, this was 10th century, in 10th century, and in the 13th, 14th century, 13th, 14th century, the invaders, they broke the Vidyashala, they broke the arms of the statue. The arms of our knowledge system were broken. There were no more hands working on the knowledge system. So in the 13th, 14th century, the invaders, they destroyed the Vidyashala, that place of knowledge, studies, and they broke the arms. This is symbolic. You see, no longer you are active with your knowledge. And that continued from 11th century, 12th century, right up to, let us say, 20th century, 1900, because in the Calcutta University, first the Presidency College in the 19th century, and then the Calcutta University, great scholars of Sanskrit and history worked. And you can see the beginning of the, I won't say rediscovery, because nothing is ever really lost, but I would say recognition of the Gyan, the knowledge traditions in Calcutta, and then it slowly started, and we are in the cycle of recovery. And see, this is 10th century, and this is Konark, Sun Temple of Konark. This is the wheel of the Sun Temple of Konark, because the Sun Temple in Konark is in the form of a chariot. It is a chariot wheel. It has 8 spokes. 8. Because we divide a day, 24 hours, into 8 ghadis. Ghadi कहते हैं उसे, 8 ghadis. So 8. And this wheel, this is the wheel of time, because unlike the Western linear view of time, we have the cyclical view, and the cycle has come back. The knowledge is broken and the knowledge is come back. This is the significance of this title, if you don't mind. I thought, that gives some idea.
Certainly.
Look at this. Look at this book. It has 3 sculptures. If you can see, 3 sculptures. From left to right, this is Jaimini. Jaimini is the author of, author नहीं कहना चाहिए, author तो लिखी हुई किताब का होता है ना? Composer of. Our scholars are composers. They are in a way musicians, you see. They are like musicians. In fact, our dictionaries are also metrical. Even the dictionaries are composed in meter. Why meter? Because meter binds, constrains your mind. You see, binds, not binds. It gives a track to your mind. Track. You can't go on and say what I mean, however, in other words, moreover. No. You are given 32 syllables, and whatever you want to say, you say in 32 syllables. So, Jaimini's Mimamsa Sutra. Mimamsa is one of the 6 Shaddarshanas. Mimamsa, Sankhya, Yoga, Nyaya, Vaisheshik, and Vedanta. 6 systems. Mimamsa is a system which is basically the source of the, not source, but you can say which codified the interpretation system, interpretation of texts in India, but it is basically a philosophy of the rituals as an essential part of Vedas. Karma Kanda, yajna kaise karna hai, कौन सी वस्तु चाहिए आपको, what things you need, यज्ञ करता कौन है, किसके लिए करता है, किस प्रकार करता है, और उसका ध्येय क्या है, उसका फल क्या है. This is the subject matter of Mimamsa. And very interestingly, Danino ji, one of the person asks the Guru, Sir, you have explained every aspect of yajna, but you have not explained why it is done. He says, there is only one reason for all human activity: self-interest, promotion of self-interest. There is only one reason, that is self-interest. You promote self-interest. अपना लाभ. जब हम दान भी देते हैं to feel virtuous, कुछ किसी गरीब को देते हैं, खाना खिलाते हैं, तो थोड़ी देर के लिए सोचते हैं हम बहुत अच्छे इंसान हैं. Nothing is in a human being. Human being is born as a very selfish person. Very selfish. You don't have to teach any human being to eat more or to tell a lie. He knows how to tell a lie. What you have to teach man is how to speak the truth and how to eat less. Eat less. So you see yajna and this. Now this is Jaimini. And the second one is, he wrote Mimamsa Sutra. Jaimini belonged to northern India, Kashmir area. Vyaghrapada was a Kannadiga. You were asking Pan-Indianness of the Indian knowledge systems. And Jaimini is about 4th century BC. Vyaghrapada is 2nd century CE, 1st or 2nd century. And Vyaghrapada belonged to Karnataka. He was a grammarian. He wrote a grammar book in 2nd century. And that is about 900 years after Panini's Ashtadhyayi. You see, Dashaka, the grammar was no Dashaka. And he is called Vyaghrapada, because his legs are shown as the legs of a tiger. Because he contended with the Buddhists who argued that grammar is not needed. Why grammar? सब लोग बोलते हैं, जैसा भी बोलते हैं, they communicate successfully. Whether they are using a dialectal form or they are using a standard form or using another dialect, we understand. If we understand, then why grammar? Why grammar? It's a grand debate between the Buddhists and the grammarians, grammarian tradition. The grammarians in India are also Vedantins, you know, Vedantins. And I imagine that I have spent a number of years of my life working in the grammarians tradition. So this gentleman is called Tiger because he contended. There is a book. I know all the books we mentioned from Indian tradition, they are new books, you know. And in fact, in JNU, when I wanted to speak in Hindi or Sanskrit, I used to say, will you allow me to speak in a foreign language? Because English has become native and our languages have become foreign. We are not familiar with our own words. We don't know our own thinkers. For example, Kumaril Bhatt. Who was Kumaril Bhatt? You see, Kumaril Bhatt in 6th century, he wrote 2 tremendous volumes. You see, one of them was Tantra Vartika. And it was translated into English. Mahamahopadhyay Sir Ganganath Jha, Vice Chancellor of Allahabad University. He was a giant. You see, he was given the title of Mahamahopadhyay by the Indian scholars, Sanskrit word. And he was knighted by the British, Sir Mahamahopadhyay. He spent 25 years translating that book. 25 years. These days, Sahitya Academy asks you to translate a book in 10 days. You know, and they give you 200 rupees a page. But that kind of, in that book, in the 10th chapter, the Vyakarana Adhyayana, there is some other word there. He reports the debate between the Buddhists and the grammarians. You see, now when we come to Ashtadhyayi, which is 700 BC, at the end of thousands of years of grammar, 10 major grammarians Panini wrote. After 1,000 years, from that to say 6th century AD, you are a continuous speculation about this going on. And Kumaril Bhatt reports that great grammar, and Vyaghrapada belongs there. He's shown as legs are tiger's legs. Tiger. He fought. He fought against the Buddhists, just as later Kumaril Bhatt did. And Shankaracharya did. Fought not with arms, not with Shastra, but with Shastra, with ideas. They contended with ideas, not with the weapons, not with weapons. And of course, it was possible in a culture, which is a dialogic culture, where the samvada was of three types, and we are talking of the first one, that is which is vada. Then there is jalp and there is vitanda, because people argue to make the other person look a fool, or people argue to make fun of somebody. But to argue, to gain exact knowledge, and the one constraint was, if you are convinced by the other person, then you will adopt his ideas. For example, the Mandar Mishra, after being convinced by Shankaracharya, became his disciple. And he wrote the great Mundaka Upanishad ka uska introduction he wrote. So this was the grammar. Then the third one is Patanjali. Patanjali, जो के अंजलि में गिरा. He was an abandoned child. He was found by a Brahmin widow, and she brought him up, and he became a continental mind. In the West also, Patanjali is compared to Aristotle. Is it that kind of breadth and range in his Mahabhashya, from mathematics to poetry and everything, he was a master of. So Patanjali. Now Patanjali is shown in the lower part of the body is that of a snake. He is shown as Sheshanaga ka avatar, the manifestation of a Sheshanaga. Now Sheshanaga, in our tradition, the earth, the world, it sits on the head of Sheshanaga. So Sheshanaga is the custodian of wealth in the tradition also. He is the custodian of wealth. But what greater wealth than knowledge? And Patanjali, as the custodian of knowledge, is given this form of Sheshanaga. And all these three, this sculpture is in the Chidambaram temple in South India. Chidambaram. वहां कभी जाइएगा, दर्शन करिएगा. You see, is there Chidambaram? What is the meaning of Chidambaram? Chitta Ambaram. The Chitta, the self, is the dress. Ambar, sky. And in the Digambar Jainas are those ascetics who walk without clothes, who don't wear clothes. Because the Dishaye, they are their clothes. After all, clothing is only to hide our own sense of shame. And I must tell you, once in near JNU, there is a Jaina Digambar Jaina temple, and a great ascetic was there, great scholar. I went to meet him, and I went to meet him in the official car. Now I am a semi-demi anglicized Indian. You see, I have affiliated myself with Indian thought, Indian habits of mind. But basically, I was as disaffiliated as you are, disaffiliated from ourselves. So I was sitting in the rear seat. When we went inside, the driver Saab, Lakshman Singh ji, who is not a disaffiliated Indian, because he did not undergo English education. He was from a village in Uttarakhand. He stopped the car. I said, sir, why are you stopping? He said, sir, Swami ji padha rahe hain. He is teaching. He was sitting under a tree, and girls and boys and ladies and sitting there. And I made an observation, which a disaffiliated Indian will make. कि ये तो नंगे हैं. He is naked. You see? You know what Lakshman Singh said? Sir, वो तो आप देख रहे हैं ना. You are seeing him as naked. Those who are sitting and they don't see him as naked. So the nakedness is in the eyes. So, the whole culture is different. Now, in Chidambaram, Chitta Ambaram. So if you go to the temple, there are three alcoves there. There is this Panini, the Nataraja in the left one, Nataraja. This Nataraja is in Chidambaram temple. Beautiful statue. The god of dance, the king of dance, not god, king of dance, Nataraja. And on the right side, there is a Shivalinga. But the middle alcove, there is nothing. Nothing. You just stand there, shut your eyes, and you become one. You become one with what you are meditating on. That is the chitta becoming the ambara. Your chitta taking the rupa, as the yoga says, yoga system, the chitta taking the rupa, roop of what you are meditating on, So that is the meaning of Chidambaram. And this statue is there, this is a sculpture is there. Now look at the size. Look at the size. This is the tallest, Jaimini. Next is Vyagrapada. Third is Patanjali. In normal Indian Sanskrit world, there is no scholar equal to Patanjali. But here in this sculpture, he is shown as smaller in stature. This is the tradition. The tradition, the word for tradition in our language is parampara. Parapara. Earlier, later becomes earlier than later. Linked. A continuous chain of links between early and next. A system of transmission of texts and ideas from one teacher to the disciple, one generation to the next. A continuous, unbroken tradition, that is parampara. The parampara rates these scholars as this. And I must tell you something funny. My name appears here. The publisher had put my name here. Here. Are you getting what I'm trying to say? I told him, please take me down. Because people who know, they will say, these we know, but who is this fellow? Kapil Kapoor. Why is he here? Why is he here along with Jaimini and Vyagrapada and Patanjali? And if you want to make a statue of me compared to them, I will be less than a quarter of a millimeter, as far as my knowledge is concerned. So I asked him to push me down here, so that nobody connects me with these great minds. And sir, their work is available. Earlier people used to say, Sanskrit nahi aati, kaise padhe? Unfortunately, Sanskrit is the most frequently translated language in the world. And major texts of Sanskrit are available in English and in Indian language translations. Like for example, people used to say that Vedas ko padhne nahi dete the, Vedo ko padhne nahi dete the. So I tell them कि आप पढ़ लीजिए, अब तो 400 रुपए में मिलते हैं. In 400 rupees, you get 4 Vedas in English and in your language. पर अब तो Brahmin भी नहीं पढ़ते, because they are difficult to understand. Anyways, so you see here, this man is from Kashmir, this is from Karnataka, and Patanjali was from Gonda. Gonda is near Etawah, where Mulayam Singh was born. You see, these days it was an area known for dacoits. But in those days it was known for scholars also. Anyways, Chandrasekhar also, the Prime Minister, was from this area. So you have the spread of all this, Kashmir, Karnataka, Central India, right? You get an idea of this? Anyways. Well, sir, I could continue with all my books, but I think I'll start with your ideas.
Thank you, Kapilji. This was a wonderful introduction, and I think you have already said so much. But if we can try to take the exploration a little further, you have just now explained this continuous and cumulative tradition. These are two words which I have often heard you or read you use to describe India's intellectual tradition. But how do we reconcile with this concept of loss and recovery? So is loss to be taken metaphorically, or what does it symbolize in Indian tradition? Why should we speak of loss at all? Of course, there are cycles, we understand that, but what specifically does this theme or this image of loss refer to? Why is it brought up? And does it not conflict with this continuum?
You see, when we trace the tradition of texts and thinkers in any domain, let's say grammar or philosophy, Abhinavagupta or others, the link between ideas is very clear, because no successive Indian thinker, please note, and I mean it, no later Indian thinker works in ignorance of what has gone before. From the beginning, you see, if a commentator is doing a tika parampara कहते हैं, doing a tika on 7th century BC Ashtadhyayi in, let us say, 16th century, that is 2200 years after the, by the way, this is Ashtadhyayi grammar. That's all. It's only this size. It has only 32,000 syllables, not words, and they resolve into 4,000 sutras. And this book, this grammar is the only grammar of human language which is explicit, rule bound, and comprehensive. But it is such an intellectual construct, achievement, as MacDonald, the man who wrote the history of linguistics in 1933, he said on page 34, Ashtadhyayi is one of the greatest monuments of human intelligence. You see, in 32,000 words, to write a grammar of a language so rich as Sanskrit, a generative grammar, it predicts the possible usage also, you see, and in explicit manner, explicit, nothing is left to your judgment, and rule bound. Now, this 7th century BC, 7th to 8th century BC, and by the way, it was written in my part of the country. People generally think Punjabis are only soldiers, but they were always soldiers, but they were thinkers also. They still are. Your latest intellectual text, major text of India, is Guru Granth Sahib, 16th century. There is nothing comparable to Guru Granth Sahib. You know, look at the Rig Veda. Rig Veda is a collection of hymns by the different scholars of the time, rishis, a number of rishis. The Rig Veda is a put together book, a put together composition, ideas of these scholars of those times. And there are something 5,000, 6,000 years ago. And Guru Granth Sahib in 16th century is also a collection of the wisdom of the scholars of India, all the bhakti poets of India, bhakti poets. And you will be amazed that Namdev, the Maharashtrian 13th century poet, who was with Gyaneshwarji. I'm sure you don't know these people because they are Indians, they are not worth knowing, you know. But Gyaneshwar, Sant Gyaneshwar, at the age of 15, he gave public lectures on Bhagavad Gita, which were jotted by people, and it is available today as Gyaneshwari. Kindly, if you find time, get the book Gyaneshwari. Gyaneshwar's commentary on Bhagavad Gita at the age of 15, and at the age of 21, he took Jivant Samadhi. He put an end to his life. And Namdev, who was older to him, was his follower. But he was there. He was there in Alandi near Pune, where Gyaneshwarji took Samadhi. Then he left Pune and he went to Punjab. Namdev, sir, Danino ji, you ask me pan-Indianness. I'm talking of 13th century. Namdev, a Maharashtrian poet, when he becomes depressed, he leaves there and goes to Punjab, North India. And there is a village, Kumman, in Punjab, where he lived. And he died there. His Samadhi is there. And sir, the verses, the poetry, bhakti poetry of Namdev in Marathi is found for the first time in Guru Granth Sahib, not in Maharashtra. Is there an evidence of pan-Indianness?
Very much.
How people connect? Anyways, so this book, you see, Panini was a very wonderful man. His method was, he was a I think, assistant professor in Taxila University in the 8,000 grade or something. But in those days, the salary was in terms of buffaloes and cows and a few disciples to take care of animals and also the teacher. And Patanjali, the Mahabhashya man, you see this man, who wrote a commentary 1100 years after this book was composed. 1100 years after. A great commentary on this. Patanjali describes how did Panini work. Because, you know, he gives you data, living data, contemporary data of Sanskrit from Assam, from Kapisha in Afghanistan, from Saurashtra, from Andhra. There were no tape recorders. There were no recording instruments. Then Patanjali tells us, for 10 years, he walked around the country with his disciples. Then he went back to Taxila. Then he spent some years on meditation. He meditated on the language data. And you know, he saw. In India, you see with your eyes closed. You don't see with your eyes open. It is I, not EYE. You see in the cell. He saw the grammar of Sanskrit. And then he left Taxila and he went to the northern mountains. That is what Patanjali says. That means north of Imran Khan's Islamabad today. North of Islamabad, he went to the mountains. And Patanjali says, he sat down in deep samadhi, prang mukh hokar, facing the north. He went into deep samadhi and with great effort, over a number of days, he produced this grammar sutras one by one. He composed. He saw the entire thing and composed. Now, when I was doing my MLit dissertation, I tried to follow his method in my MLit dissertation. I went up to 4 sutras and then didn't know what to do. I'll come to that a little later. So this commentary. And his method was empirical, observation. He went and collected the data. And then meditation. Because knowledge is created in the oral culture. Knowledge is created in the mind. It is stored in the mind. It is transferred from mind to mind. And it is disseminated from minds to minds. Dissemination. So the entire oral culture is not oral because India didn't know writing. Panini himself mentions the word lipi 20 times. Lipi is script. And Ashoka's inscriptions, they come in 5 scripts. 4th century BC. But oral culture is an alternative culture. It's not written culture. Even today, we Indians are oral people. Try going to an office. Take an application and put it before the clerk. He will push your application and say, what is the matter? Tell me. He will ask you, bataiye. In Europe, if you start speaking, They will push a paper before you and say, put it down, put it down, put it down. We are still oral people. We like to talk. We like to connect by speech, transfer our ideas by speech. So from this to this, the commentary tradition. And I thought that I will tell you the empirical method, time to lighten the humor. People say he was so empirical, observation-minded, that once he wanted to describe a tiger, so he went to the forest and he wanted to observe a tiger, and the tiger swallowed him. This is the first case, Danino ji, of the data swallowing the scholar. The data swallowing the scholar. So this is, anyways, we'll come to that later.
Kapil ji, can I ask you a question?
No, you asked me a question about continuity and loss.
Yes, I did.
See, from one thinker to the other, there is a gap sometime of hundreds of years. But there is no gap in the connection of ideas.
Right.
No gap. And that needs to explain how did this happen? Because there were, schools, patshalas, and as late as 1833, along with Macaulay, Woods also wrote a dispatch. In Woods' dispatch, it is written, India has 2 lakh, I think it is either 47 or 97,000, 2,47,000 patshalas, India, in 1833, when England had only about 800. And India's literacy in 1833 was 97%. 97. And when we shifted in 1834 from our languages to English, then in 1884, India's literacy fell to 16%. 16%. I said it in Cape. I've said it to the education minister, because our great education system, it is a wonderful system. It's a very liberal system. It teaches us to respect all religions except our own. It's a very liberal education. It teaches us to respect all religions, but not our own. Not our own. So anyways, this is continuities of ideas, and the connection took place because the ideas were continuously alive in various centers of learning all over India. And we have on record that when Abhinavagupta was teaching in Srinagar in Sharda 1, Sharda 1 is now called Harvan. It is now broken place, but that was the Sharda, is the goddess of learning. And in POK, you have the original Sharda Mandir. But very, very interesting that unlike our part of Kashmir, in POK, the government has put a railing around the Sharda temple and does not allow people to enter it and desecrate it. The old Sharda temple, the goddess of learning. So there were centers of learning, schools of learning. And we have the record that when Abhinav was teaching, then scholars from Karnataka, the teachers used to send their brightest disciple to the teacher who was teaching somewhere, because the reputation traveled by sound, by word of mouth. How? Should I give you an example, concrete example? When Shivaji escaped from the fort in Agra, when he escaped, by evening, everybody in Maharashtra knew. How? And that evening, Maharashtra had a Diwali. How did it happen? The moment he escaped, there was the drum system, on the highest place, the drum. That drum picked up by another drum. That drum picked up by another drum. And the message went. With the speed of sound, the message went to Maharashtra. In 1857, the message of the rebellion was sent through chapatis. Chapati baked there, went to that village baked the chapati, it went to that village. Now you can imagine patshalas which are devoted to learning. and that learning continuity was maintained by them. It has broken only with the British education system. When my great friend, if I am very great admirer of Macaulay, because his policy has lasted for 184 years, and our planners still don't know what is happening to them. 3E, that was his policy. 3E, English, education, employment. English, education, employment. It still continues. And then we talk about and hold seminars on decolonizing the mind and, colonization and so on and so on. Anyway, sir.
Kapilji, can we go back a little bit once again? I want to quote this saying of, I think it is Charaka, which you use often, where he says that one who knows only his tradition does not even know his tradition, if I am quoting correctly.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. This was in fact Bhartrihari. Bhartrihari in the 5th century, in his Vakyapadiya, volume 2, कांड दूसरा, वॉल्यूम कहा क्योंकि हिंदी के शब्द समझ नहीं आते ना, कांड दूसरा कांड, उसका 484 आई थिंक लास्ट सूत्र ऑफ द सेकंड वॉल्यूम, ही सेज द माइंड acquires critical acumen. The mind acquires critical acumen by interacting with other traditions. What does he know who knows only his own tradition?
Yes.
What does he know who knows only his own tradition? But today, the tragedy is opposite. Our mind does not acquire critical acumen by interacting with the Anglo-Saxon traditions. And we don't know our own tradition. So what does he know who does not know the other tradition and does not know his own tradition? We are Trishanku. Trishanku, you know the Rishi? Caught between heaven and earth. Caught between the two worlds. And you have to be a self-taught person. Just as I said yesterday, I am a self-guillotined person. You see, I cut my own head. I mean here. So the problem is, this was said by Bhartrihari. That was a very confident India. Very confident India.
Exactly. That is my point. To make such a statement speaks of a lot of self-confidence.
Yes,
So
yes.
What created that self-confidence, that I am so strong in my understanding of fundamentals that I can deal with other schools, other traditions, and I will be enriched in the process? What is it that made that self-confidence?
Very, very nice, sir. You see, I made a statement that India is the world's oldest knowledge-centered society.
Yes.
ज्ञान केंद्रित सभ्यता है. Our civilization is knowledge-centered. Our classical texts, Vedas, we don't treat them as sacred or religious texts. These words are used these days. They are not sacred, because even while they were being composed, there were people who were abusing them.
Yes.
The Charvakas, you know, they said, what is this? Is all the rhapsodies of knaves. These are rhapsodies of knaves. Kautsa, a materialist skeptic, says, he asked the Panditji, what are you studying? He said, मैं वेद मंत्रों के अर्थ लगा रहा हूँ. I'm trying to fix the meaning of Vedic hymn. He said, you are in a fruitless job, because these hymns have no meaning. They are meaningless. Nirarthak hai. So, but we did not burn those people. We did not kill them. In fact, Yaska, 200 years before Panini, he starts with Kotsa. He quotes Kotsa.
Yes.
The Purva Paksha. The other point of view, that, you know, it is all meaningless. And then you try to establish meaning. So, sir, the confidence came from a powerful knowledge systems embedded not only in the intellectual levels or the learning schools of learning, but which had sedimented, just as sand settles in a glass of water. had sedimented into the minds of the people through mechanisms of Katha Pravachan Parampara. Katha Pravachan Parampara is very ancient. You have people in the evening, in the village, in the temple or even outside, narrating some text, explaining some text, and explaining it in the language of the people. And Shankaracharya, Adi Shankaracharya, himself was a Pravachanankara. He used to, as a sannyasi, he used to, after 32 kilometers, he will sit down outside a village. In the evening, he will talk to the people and explain to them. And then 4 months in a year, Chomasa, he will go back to Sringeri and then compose his texts in Sanskrit. He will speak in Lok Bhasha. You will wonder, how many languages did he know? Because we are all disaffiliated people. I was also one. So I asked the Sringeri Shankaracharya, yes, sir, how many languages does the Shankaracharya know? Because, we are governed by the constitution. 1476 languages, 1526 languages. Shankaracharya ji told me, Beta, son, from where do you come? I said, from Amritsar. He said, all right, the language you speak in Amritsar, a kind of Hindi Punjabi, you speak it, you come to Delhi, go to Haryana, go to Rajasthan, go to Gujarat, go to Maharashtra, come to Madhya Pradesh, go to Bihar, go to UP, everybody will understand you. See the large chunk of area, this is a language cluster. We have 5 Prakrits in this country. The whole country is divided into 5 Prakrits. Northwest, but when you go to Maharashtra, if you walk down into Karnataka, then you get the second Prakrit. But if you walk, gradually as you walk, you will pick up the language also. एक कोश पे भाषा बदले एक कोश पे पानी बदले. Every 4 miles, the water changes, and every 3 miles, the language changes in this country. And I have been eating samosas all over the country. And I say that every 2 miles, the samosa also changes. The quality of what you eat also. Immense variety of food. It's not like America. You travel for 300 kilometers on an expressway, and you start with an hamburger and Coca-Cola with crushed ice. And after 300 kilometers, hamburger with Coca-Cola with crushed ice. There is immense variety here. In languages, people dress everything. Anyways, so sir.
Kapilji, so you mentioned this Vada Parampara, this tradition of dialogue, yes, which is also part of that exercise of self-confidence.
Yes. And at the learned level, yes, there was the Vada Parampara. At the popular level, there was the Katha Pravachan Parampara. And then there were the schools.
Can you tell us something about the Katha Pravachan Parampara?
Yes, Katha. In fact, it is even now alive. If we switch on the television in the morning at 6:30, Sanskar TV, you have a very great thinker. Nobody counts him as a thinker because he wears, Bhagwa, and he is the sannyasi of an akhada, Juna akhada, Swami Avdeshananda ji, Avdeshananda. He is the head of all the akhadas in India. A great scholar. Let's listen to him for 15 minutes. Look at his command of language. Look at his command of ideas. I make it a point to listen to him because there are very few people from whom at my age of 80 I can now learn. I still learn from him. He is a Jnana Vriddha. He is older to me in knowledge and much older in dharma. Much older in dharma. You see, in age he may be younger, but he is much older. So sir, Avdeshanand, he explains concepts. Then you, at 6:40, you have Murari Bapu. And Murari Bapu talks of Ramayana, Ram Katha. And he gets so involved in it, he takes some small thing. One from Tulsidas. And then he sings it, he explains it, and he brings it, and he sings even, he brings in even film songs. And he brings in Guru Granth Sahib. He brings in the Andhra poem also. And he explains to you the narrative the narrative, the story. The Katha is the narrative. You have Bhagavad Katha, you have Ram Katha, and you even have Kathas of Mahabharata. If you go to a Kumbh Mela, you will have 10 people, expounding one narrative in different ways. So you have several perspectives on the same story. Now this Pravachan Parampara, Katha Pravachana, was in every village in India. Every village. Some walking sannyasi will come, he will be in the temple. The villagers in the evening will get together and they will ask some question and then he will start telling them something. You see? And you will get. So this was how, that's why we have the technical vocabulary of our thought. Technical vocabulary. It is now part of our ordinary language vocabulary in all Indian languages. I'll give you the example. In this 2800-year-old book, 2800-year-old, Panini's Ashtadhyayi, the first sutra is Vriddhir Adechya. The second one is Adainga Guna. There are two technical words here. Vriddhi. Vriddhi. The second technical word is Gun. Gun. All of you who are listening, tell me, do you understand Vriddhi and Gun or not? Everybody understands. Because it has now a broad generalized meaning of what it technically in a grammar, Vriddhi meant lengthening of the length of the vowel. And Guna meant alternating the quality of the vowel. For example, if you say A followed by A, it becomes a long A. That is Vriddhi. And if A followed by E, Maha Ishwar, it becomes Maheshwar, A. That is Guna. So it's a technical term. But today, it is an ordinary language term. And the words we use so often, and when we use them, people will say, now stop boring us. You have started again. Atma, Paramatma, Atma, Paramatma, Moksha, Siddhi. The moment you use these words, people say, bas kar yaar, hawa aane do, let the air come. You have started. But these are very, 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 very strong, dense technical words. How many people understand Atma? I was told in 1990, 97, 98 by Chattopadhyay ji, who was editing a 53-volume history of Indian culture and philosophy. I had written 3 articles from them in different volumes. He asked me to write an article on Atma. And I started reading and thinking and working. I wrote 19 pages and then I stopped and I went to him and I apologized. Sir, I will not be able to write. He says, why? I said, because the arguments in our tradition against the existence of Atma are so convincing that I am not able to find arguments to cut them. But I belong to a tradition, grammarian, Vedantin, where I have to believe in Atma. So I don't want to proceed and lose my faith. When I get an answer, I will come back to it. I got answer about 7-8 years later, but by that time the project was finished. So you see, Atma is it's not, but everybody speaks Atma. Atma ka sukh hai, Atma mein Atma ka anand hai na? Atma mein prakash hota hai. We are enlightened in ourselves. Everybody so talks, but it's a very profound concept. So also Paramatma. It is not Paramatma, one God. It is the Paramatma, the ultimate self. What is the ultimate self of myself? What is the ultimate self? It's like, the pitcher, the pot. There is a space inside the pot. There is space. But when you break the pitcher, that space becomes part of the space. So the self and the ultimate self. So Bhagavad Gita says, moksha. What is moksha? Moksha is not a very, very ephemeral concept. Moksha is, according to Sankhya, freedom from suffering here and now. Freedom from suffering here and now. 3 kinds of suffering: physical, accidental, and spiritual. And there are a lot of things. I will not go and distract myself. So Bhagavad Gita says, how do you liberate yourself from this world, sufferings of the world? And he said, when you see yourself in others, and when you see all others in yourself, in yourself. So in Indian thought, there is no other, no other. The other is inside you, because Gita says you are your own friend and you are your own enemy. The enemy is not outside. You are your own enemy. So, and Shankaracharya in a Vivek Chudamani, he says, Brahma Atam Ekatva Bodhen. Brahma Atam Ekatva Bodhen. ब्रह्म का और आत्मा के एकत्व के ज्ञान, एकत्व का ज्ञान, ब्रह्म ब्रह्मन, ब्रह्मन और आत्मा का एक होने का ज्ञान, नॉलेज जब आ जाता है, ज्ञान, वो ज्ञान आने का क्या मतलब है? शब्दों का अर्थ नहीं है ज्ञान, ज्ञान जो अंदर चित्त में बैठ जाता है. इट कंट्रोल. यू रिमेंबर द स्टोरी ऑफ युधिष्ठिर एंड द पांडवास. द्रोणाचार्य टीचिंग देम. One lesson is क्रोध नहीं करना चाहिए. Next day Dronacharya asked, have you learned the lesson? 104 people said yes. Yudhishthira said, no sir, I have not learned the lesson. Second day he again said, then Dronacharya said, you are slow or not so slow. It's a simple lesson. Only on the 5th day he said, I have learned the lesson. He says, what is the matter? Yeah, he says, sir, till now when you were punishing me, I was getting angry. Now I don't get angry. मैं क्रोध नहीं करता, मैंने लेसन सीख लिया है. दिस इज ज्ञान. ज्ञान इज दिस. तो ज्ञान ब्रह्म आत्म एकत्व बोधेन मोक्ष सिद्धयति. तभी आप लिबरेट होते हो, ना अन्यथा. और कोई तरीका नहीं है. शंकराचार्य रोट अ पोएम इन व्हिच ही सेड कि पानिनी का धातु पाठ आपको मोक्ष नहीं दिलाएगा. और ये जो व्याख्यान की शक्ति है, वाग वैखरी शब्द झरी शास्त्र व्याख्यान कौशलम, इससे मोक्ष नहीं मिलेगा. कपिल कपूर, मोक्ष इससे नहीं मिलेगा.
Can you please translate? Can you please translate? In case somebody does not understand Hindi.
This one or the earlier one, Brahmatam Ekatva Bodhen?
This one, this one.
This one is that Vaga Vaikhari, the great facility with speech, lucidity of speech. Vaga Vaikhari Shabd Jhari, the raindrops of words, the rain, words coming like rain. Vaga Vaikhari Shabd Jhari, Shastra Vyakhyan Kaushalam, the ability to expound a text. These are not the instruments of moksha, liberation. Liberation will only come if you realize the oneness of yourself and everybody else, the jivas. So in the Indian tradition, we don't consider man as a higher. We're part of one of 8.4 million yonis. We are one of them. The cockroach has as much right to exist as I have. And even today, in the evening in small towns, once when I went with my daughter, an old man, he was bending down and putting something from his bag. So my daughter, small daughter, asked me, Papa, what is he doing? I said, he's putting atta and sugar, flour and sugar to the ants, where ants are there. Where ants are there, there is a little dust. So you can see that ants are there. So he's putting sugar and atta for the ants, You see? So this is it. Respect for life. They are teaching us human rights. But we believe in a jivaka right. Every jiva has the right to exist. You still have people, the Jainas, who walk barefoot, who put this thing here, so that even the coronavirus should not die. They don't want even the coronavirus to die. Nothing to die. And the Jain civilization is the culmination of non-violent civilization. You know what one Jain text says? Not allowing the tree to grow naturally. आजकल बोनसाई बनाते हैं ना, people इतने बड़े people का इतना सा people बना देते हैं to show man's great strength. Not to allow a tree to grow naturally, not to allow a river to flow naturally is violence. It is violence. ये हिंसा है. How much हिंसा do we do? कितने डैम्स बनाते हैं, कितने पेड़ों को काट छाट करते हैं, कितने बोनसाई बनाते हैं. So
Kapil,
nature.
Is this an example of coexistence of multiple perspectives? For example, the perspective of ahimsa, and on the other hand, Krishna telling Arjuna that you
Yeah.
must fight and kill. So,
Yes.
how do
Can
we?
you, sir, can you focus on this behind me?
Yes, the chariot of Lord
There is
Krishna.
chariot of Lord Krishna. There
Yes,
is Mahatma Buddha.
there is
I have
Buddha.
war and peace behind me. I have war and peace coexisting behind me. You see?
So is this a
The
feature? Is this a feature of Indian intellectual
Yes.
traditions that we do not mind these contradictions and these multiple perspectives?
Not at all. Not at all. Because we are not a monistic people. We are not monotheistic people. We are not a people who believe in one truth. We believe in multiplicity of truths.
Hmm.
And ekam satya, बहुत लोग quote करते हैं. There is a truth out there. We don't know what it is. Because when I speak it, I I say it in my words. I say it as I see it. But we don't know what it is. There is a truth out there. But the wise speak of it in different ways. And Bhartrihari says, Bhartrihari, 5th century. Bhartrihari is a very good friend of mine, like Plato and Aristotle. I have some very nice friends, you see. And he says, Swavikalpaja, Vada Baudha Mata, up from one's own mind and intellect, predisposition. We produce our own systems of thought, and they are all valid. They are all valid. However, he says, ekatva buddhi, sarvavada avirodhini. This is very important. It is not ek buddhi, not one, not crush them into one. Don't make a chutney of hari mirch and salt and everything. No, but put them together in let's say in lemon juice and let them stay together. So ekatva buddhi is a unifying intellect, unifying. So sarvavada, ekatva, unifying intellect is a sarvavada avirodhini, does not contradict any school of thought, any faith. It's not in opposition to any. It's not. So, when I used to watch Durand football in Delhi in 1960s, 58, 59, I was an MA student in Delhi. In 58, 1958, 59. Almost 100 years ago, sir. It looks like it. I used to watch football matches. And in football matches, before the match started, a man dressed as a king with his, toga picked up by his disciples, he will walk around and come in the middle and say, ye bhi achhe, ye bhi achhe. This is the philosophy. Ye bhi achhe, ye bhi achhe. So we have no difficulty. No difficulty. But problem is, if I were to argue with a Marxist, and I have argued, I have some genuine Marxist friends whom I admire and who admire me. Most of the people use Marxism as a boat to cross this world, this river of this world. They use Marxism as a boat. But I mean genuine. You can talk to them because Marxism, essentially to begin with, if you read the Communist Manifesto, was a moral doctrine of inequity. The key word in Karl Marx was inequity, injustice, removing injustice. This is a moral doctrine. But in the search of moral, principle, they went into violence. They went into immoral practices. So it failed. 70 saal may finish. But look at Mahatma Buddha, 6th century BC. 6th century BC to today. He's alive. He's alive. It's your Buddha. Mrs. Kapoor is looking at this is her Buddha, favorite Buddha, Emerald Buddha.
Thank you.
Did you see this, sir?
Yes, Kapilji. Yes.
Yes.
Kapilji, if I may narrate an anecdote which introduced me to that aspect of Indian culture. One day, long ago, probably 35 years ago, I went to a hardware shop in a small village and I wanted to buy a little machete, to cut branches. And the seller presented me with two different machetes. So I said, which one is better? And his answer was, both are better. So is that an
Yeah,
example
this
of
is
what?
it. Yes, because everyone has a virtue.
Yes.
You see, you have to look for that. Look for that. But at the same time, you see the other part of the doctrine. You see, what was the dilemma in Mahabharata? What was the dilemma? The dilemma was stated by Arjun. He said that the people for whom we desire a kingdom, that is wealth and all that, if we kill them, then what for? Why should I kill them? Why should I fight? Why should I fight? I'll not fight. So you see, to fight also for a for self-interest, but you can fight clinically. Clinically, as Matthew Arnold in his critical essay says, the disinterestedness of a Brahmin, the disinterestedness of a Brahmin. This is about 1842 or so, 1852, Matthew Arnold writing in England. See, the disinterestedness. Just as I give you example from the Vedic text, and this is Yaska. You know, Kautsa, the great critic of Vedas, he said the Vedic statements are tautological, contradictory, and they are hyperbolic, and they are counterfactual, and they are counter what is called that sangati coherence, non-coherent, and all that. And he says that, for example, in Rig Veda, the Rig Veda proscribes. What does it proscribes? Don't pile fire in the sky. Don't pile fire in the sky. He said this is silly because you can't pile fire in the sky. So you are proscribing, don't do, but you cannot do. Silly. And look at the answer. Look at the answer, sir. Yask. He says, no utterance is meaningless. And he is quoting Shavar Swami. Not quoting. 700 years later, Shavar Swami, in his commentary on Mimamsa, 1700 years before Wittgenstein, propounded the principle that no linguistic utterance is meaningless. Shavar. And each word means, in a text, each word means what it means in actual usage. So don't say it is a metaphor because it is inconvenient. If God is angry in Bible, he is angry because Hebraic God is angry God. Don't say it's a metaphor. It's not a metaphor. So you see, what was I saying? I lost the track.
You were saying that no utterance is meaningless.
Yas says he is answering Kautsa. He says proscribing the impossible, meaningless. He said no. And look at the example. Our girls will appreciate much more than boys. He says every young mother, her newborn child, can't even turn that child. When she puts the child down on the bed, will say, don't run away, I am coming. See? Don't run away, I am coming. Arre, sir. I think I've lost.
Kapilji, we can still hear you and see you.
Yeah, I've come back.
Very well.
I've come back. So you see, this is a beautiful statement. He says, she will say, don't run away, I'll come. And that child can't even turn. His meaning is her great love for her. And she is looking into the future. In fact, she is actually seeing her child growing up and running and running. You see? So you have to read meaning. So this is like, so disinterestedness. The disinterestedness, he gives an example. For example, a woodcutter, and this is again Veda, Rig Veda. A woodcutter, when he is about to cut the tree, he prays to the axe. He prays to the axe. Axe. Be kind to the branch of the tree. The axe is going to cut the branch. Says, be kind. Be kind. And this is again cited by Koth. And Yask says, when a surgeon uses a knife on a gangrenous limb, when a surgeon amputates a gangrenous limb, he is doing an act of kindness. He is cutting, the axe is cutting the dead branch kindly. And of course, there is a manner of doing it also. Yes, sir.
For today, I think we will, if you permit, we will stop here and take a few questions. And tomorrow we can perhaps start with the case of Abhinavagupta, because you have a beautiful painting and you wanted to explain the different symbols of that painting. And also you wanted to talk about, how his manuscripts have been spread all over India. So we can start off tomorrow from Abhinavagupta and then we can continue this. So I will read out for you one question which is put by, and there may be a few others if you, all right. One question is put by Professor Srinivas Reddy, a young Sanskrit scholar and also scholar of classical music and classical Telugu and Tamil, and he has been associated with this institute for quite a few years. He is now in the US, and he asks this question. He says, could you speak more about the relationship between various schools like Mimamsa, Vedanta, etc., and the Buddhist Jain thinkers, also specifically about the Brahminic critique that Shankara was a closet Buddhist, So, in fact, if you click on the chat, Kapilji, if you click on the chat at the top right of your screen, if you see chat at the top right of your screen, otherwise don't worry, I will read it again. But these questions are there.
Where is the chat?
Don't worry, leave it, please leave it, don't worry. It should be at the top right. But if you move the cursor, leave it. So,
the question is the relationship between the 6 schools and then the Buddhist and Jain.
The Buddhist Jain thinkers specifically, and then the Brahmanic critique that Shankara was a closet Buddhist. So this is one question, and there will be 1 or 2 more afterwards.
Let me start with the word Brahminical and Brahmin.
Yes.
This is the most common criticism of Indian thought, classical Indian thought, that it is Brahminical, which means caste bound, that it belongs to the Brahmins, and the Brahmins have, have a copyright on this, and the Brahmins have monopolized it, and they have used it to acquire power in the society, to exploit the society, and to oppress those who are not Brahmins. Nothing can be farther than the truth. The word Brahminical is a very, very mistaken word. And it started because in English, a caste Brahman of Vedanta, Brahman, and the Brahman texts of Vedas, all the 3 have the same spelling. Brahman.
Yes.
Now, the Vedanta school, The core concept of Vedanta school is Brahman. But those who don't know this language, when they read English, it is Brahman. So Vedanta is the Brahman school. Brahman school. And people have confused it as Brahman school. Later on, Brahman was also spelled with Brahmin, M-I. Somebody
Yes.
did M-I. But
Yes.
for them, the confusion begins here. Brahman and Brahman. There is the Vedanta. In fact, there were three contending, cooperative, disputing traditions of thought in India. Three. Vedanta or grammarians. We also call them grammarians, Vedantins. And the Buddhists, Buddha, and the Jainas. Jaina. These were the contending. Mind you, the Buddhists and the Jainas are at the first cut. They are different from Vedantin because they don't posit any supreme reality. What we call God in our, our disaffiliated vocabulary. They don't posit any ultimate reality. Their kind of spirituality is there. The human beings attain a certain level of kavalya, purity, but there is nothing. So they are on one side. Buddhists and Jains are materialistic thinkers, but their materialism is ethical materialism. It is not the material materialism of the modern materialists. They were the great ascetics. Brahmins and Jainas, the Buddhists and Jainas, were basically an ascetic tradition. And to that tradition, people like Kannada, who composed Vaisheshik Sutra, Vaisheshik Sutra, one of the 6 sutras. By the way, the 6 sutras, the 6 schools of thought, which we call Astic, Theistic, or Brahmanical. In them, 3 of them do not have God. There is no God as a category. There is no God in Mimamsa. There is no God in Sankhya. There is no God in Vaisheshika. In yoga, there is an Ishvara. By the way, when you are writing about God in English, it is very simple. There is one word, God with capital G. But when you write about God in the Indian languages, you have a very great problem. Paramatma, Parameshwar, Bhagwan, Ishwar, kya likhoge? And they are not synonyms. Anyways, the God is not there in the. So our theistic systems are theistic because they accept the authority of Vedas. The Veda Kathana, Veda का जो कहा है वो सत्य है. शब्द प्रमाण. They believe in Shabda Pramana. The Buddhists and Jains do not accept Vedas as Pramana. So they are Gnostic. In India also this. Now these 3 collaborative contending systems. The 6 schools, first of all, Brahmanical is a construct which is totally based on falsehood. There is no the caste system involved here. Brahmanical. Kannada was a man who stayed out of the village, and he would hear the hut in Bihar, in Mithila. And when the crops were cut and the grain was taken away, he will collect the grains which were scattered here and there. You get my point? Crops are cut, grain is gathered in the boris and bags, carried away. Then this Kannad will go around the fields, pick up grains. And with those grains he used to live. And he was a materialist thinker. Vaisheshika is the most materialistic of the 6 systems. And he is Kannad because he is Kanabhukta. वो कन जो होते थे ग्रेन के उनको वो खाता था, वही became Kannada. So what is Kannada? So what is Brahmanical about Kannada? What is Brahmanical about him? He stayed out of the village. Well, but today's people will say वो outcast था. But in our classical text, there is nothing like the category of Dalit is not a social category of Hindu Samaj. Shudra is. But Shudra came later. First we had three, then Shudra. It came. And Shudra is also a race in Rig Veda. Race. It's also a race. And it is basically, from Purusha Sukta, where the head is the Brahmin, and the arms are the Kshatriya, chest is the Vaishya, and the legs and the feet are the Dalit. But then, when we see this picture, we see that Purusha standing. So Brahmin is at the top, and the Shudra is at the bottom. But in the Rig Veda, he was lying down. He was not standing. And these days, the Purusha is doing Shishasana. These days, he is standing on his head. The Brahmins are down and the others are up. So these are mobile systems. There was a caste system. There was no casteism. Today, there is no caste system. You have Sharma shoe store. You have Kapoor tea stall or Chaat Bandar. There is no caste system. But you have a lot of casteism today.
Kapil, can I nevertheless draw your draw your attention to the question that Srinivas Reddy was asking, that in the literary tradition there was sometimes a critique that Shankara was a closet.
Shankar is called Prachanna Bodha. So was Kumarila Bhatta. Because these people were contending with the Buddhist philosophy.
Yes.
Both became disciples of great Buddhist scholars, and they learnt Buddhism to then argue against Buddhism. Because in Vada Parampara, the first requirement is you should know the Purva Paksha, the other man's arguments completely. And you first present his arguments. Then you argue. In that Tantra Vartika I mentioned, Kumarila Bhatta, he first presents the Buddhist argument. And when I read it, I am sorry, I was not convinced by the grammarians. Just I was not convinced by the arguments for Atma. You see, so faithfully they present the other person's view. So the contending schools, they were interactive, they were in communication with each other. Vada was there, dialogue. In fact, every Indian text, Mahabhashya, great comment, it is a dialogic text. There are three persons there. There is Purva Paksha, there is the Siddhantin, and there is a Mandabuddhi Chhatra. Why is he called Mandabuddhi? Because he asks the most basic and therefore the most difficult questions. I will give you the example of that. So coming back to Reddy ji, Srinivas Reddy ji. First of all, calling Brahminical, the Vedanta or others are Brahminical. It is not Brahmanical. It is Brahmanic.
He said Brahmanic. Not Brahminical, but Brahmanic.
Brahmanic, not Brahmanic. Brahmanic.
Yes.
And because the core category is Brahman, may I for not Reddy ji is a great scholar, he knows more than I do. But for myself and others, that in the 6 Shastras, in the second one, in the Vaisheshika, third one, there are 24 tattvas, ontological elements.
Yes.
Sankhya classifies these 24 into 2 groups. This is typology. Indian mind is great at classification, taxonomy of knowledge. So Sankhya classifies into 2, Prakriti and Purush, matter and energy. And then the great insight of the Vedantins, that energy is not independent of matter. So the energized matter is Brahman. This entire universe is a manifest Brahman. The entire universe is pulsating matter in which forms arise. and forms collapse. You and I, 70 years, 90 years, 80 years ago, we were not here. 50 years from now, we will not be here. What are we? Forms which arise in this ocean and collapse. As Shankara says, like the wave, like the bubble, and like the froth in a small stream of water. You see it. It takes a form. रूप लेती है, पर फिर विसर्जन हो जाता है. उसे हम विसर्जन कहते हैं. जब हम गणेश की मूर्ति का विसर्जन करते हैं, because everything finally merges in the material, in that matter.
Kapilji, Srinivas Reddy adds one point. He says that his point was not about caste, but rather about the usage of Sanskrit language, which the early Buddhists and Jains did not.
Well, we know, I know that we still have what is called Sanskrit Buddhism and Pali Buddhism. You know, we have these two schools. But the Theravada school mostly composed their texts in Pali. And but there were, in Sanskrit remained the language of learning with both Jain and Buddhist scholars. And by the way, you know, we need to understand the growth of these languages. You see, the Vedas were composed in the language of the people. Panini did not write a grammar of Sanskrit. He never says that. He wrote grammar of Bhasha, language, and Chandas, composition, written language. Written to nahi hota tha, composition. Even now, the language I am using is language of composition. I am not using language of normal speech. I am watching out, organizing my sentences. So he wrote a grammar of language and language of composition, spoken language. So in about 400, 500, 600, 700 years, the spoken language changes, and the texts, the Sanskrit text, Vedic text, they became opaque, and that language ceased to be the spoken language. So when Buddha came 2000 years later or 1500 years later, he was, just as the Vedic rishis spoke in the language of the people, Buddha wanted to speak in the language of the people, and he chose Pali. Pali is Pali. Pali means market and Pali means village. Language of the village and language of the market. And he spoke in that language. Then the texts were composed in Pali. When they were composed in Pali, the language became frozen. And when the Jainas came, they did not then speak Pali because that was no longer the spoken language. Then they spoke Prakrit. Now Prakrit has a common noun. Prakrit means the natural spoken language. Prakrit. But when they used it as a language to compose, it became a proper noun, Prakrit. Otherwise, every language, including English, has Prakrit and Sanskrit. T.S. Eliot's English in his poems is Sanskrit English. You can't say, nobody in London spoke the English that Eliot writes. Nobody spoke that English. But yet, you can't say it is not English. In the same way, Vedic Sanskrit was a Sanskrit which you can't say people were speaking. Yet it was the language of speech. The Sanskrit, Prakrit. So Prakrit, Sanskrit divide is there. But Prakrit became a proper noun. In opposition to that, Bhas, the Sanskrit poet, called the language of the Vedas Sanskrit. And Sanskrit, which was a common noun, Samahakrita, leveled language, Samahakrita, it became Sanskrit, Sanskar Yukt. Usko ठीक कर दिया, and it became a proper noun. And then naturally prestige attached to it later, because it was the language of knowledge texts. It was the language of knowledge texts. It became a very prestigious language. But as late as 7th century, when the Sanskrit grammarians were writing, and Sanskrit playwrights, when they were writing dramas, there were people who were speaking Sanskrit, there were characters who were speaking Pali, and there were characters who were speaking Prakrit. Just as today, if you write a play in Punjab, you will have somebody speaking English, somebody speaking Punjabi, and somebody speaking English. and somebody like me speaking a mixed language. Mixed language.
Kapilji, I think the time has come to thank you very much for today.